Hello, everybody, and welcome back for week number 6. We have passed the halfway point of the USFL show. I'm your host, Sean, PSU Fans 2 Newsham. Joining me, per usual, Alex, Fearmyturtle Hardin. Alex, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good, Sean. Looks like we're actually going to get a full season in. USFL chugging along, making some rule adjustments and roster adjustments as we go. So, yeah, another exciting week of USL football.
Yeah, and we actually got big news the other day. I guess we'll talk about it quickly. XFL got a huge broadcasting deal with the likes of ESPN, which looks really promising for that. And you and I were talking about how we think things are going to play out. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you think things will play out going into the future with USFL, XFL type thing?
Yeah, it seems like XFL is kicking off like basically right after the Super Bowl in mid-February. So like there's going to be zero gap in quote unquote professional football, but if their season goes like 3 months, like it could be a situation where there's not that much overlap between XFL and USFL if they try to push to actually play again next year. So we could just get like a spring and summer full of these football slates. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, it makes sense. I think there is, if things are done right, there is at least enough people to want to watch football year round. And if you get competitive football, and I really think it could be used as a feeder league into the NFL. Like if you give players, let's say you give them a 10-game season here, another 10-game season, that's a lot of reps players can get in. And I could see it being kind of a feeder into the NFL, which to me makes a lot of sense. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it would be funny if we get a situation where a guy plays like all summer and then like goes into a preseason camp and then a full NFL season. Like it's pretty brutal on their body, but I guess those are the kind of guys that probably aren't going to play much anyway and just kind of scrambling to make the tail end of the roster.
Well, we've seen some people from the XFL make an impact, like Donald Parham made an impact. We've seen some other guys make impacts into the league. I think it's realistic that they could make some sort of an impact. The thing is, I think the USFL would be a better showcase for that because it gets you into the NFL camps earlier. But that said, those players are going to be in better shape than what you'll see some of the NFL guys will be in come the start of like training camp and stuff. And it's the only league that doesn't have like a feeder system. I know that the NBA feeder system with the D League is not that great, but they still are able to send some guys down there, and it's generally like your lower end roster guys, but it gives them some minutes. Minutes and like reps are huge because you're not getting reps as a bottom end guy in the NFL realistically. And you're talking about the NFL has like 16 games. Basketball, baseball, hockey, all of these other sports have 80 plus games, 100 plus games where people get opportunities where you just don't see that as much in the NFL. So I think actually being able to see some guys be able to get some reps is somewhat important, and it could showcase some players and get them opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise had. So I think overall the idea of it's good. I just think it needs to be done right. And I think it needs to be brought. I think it sort of needs to be viewed as like an NFL feeder type of situation.
Yeah, and I have more kind of faith in the XFL figuring that out long term than the USFL. It just seems like USFL, everything's a bit more lower budget type thing, where XFL has more of the right players and deals in place where I think it actually could be. And it'd be interesting if it is successful, if there's ever a situation where we actually have like affiliate teams, like you said, where there's actually like a feeder, like a more formal affiliation with NFL teams, or that's when it gets kind of interesting because they can stash guys down here. But I think we're probably years off of that. And
to be fair, like I think even if we get to that point, it's going to be like the NFL takes over it and decides to run like a feeder system. But it's always the same situation. I've never understood why there's issues with preseason games in the NFL. Just let back end guys play. It's not that difficult. Like those guys want to play. Those guys want to get tape and experience out there that they will not have a chance of doing otherwise. So to me, it's something that I've never understood. If you get people to watch.
Yeah, the Players Associations ran by the upper tier of the players anyway, and it seems like they're doing the players as a whole a disservice by limiting preseason games.
Correct.
That's a conversation for another day.
For sure. So, all right, quick recap from last week. There wasn't tons to really discuss, but I'll give you guys a quick rundown of what happened. DeAndre Johnson played 100% of snaps last week. We think the reason for that is because the defense he was facing plays entirely man-to-man defense. So having a mobile quarterback that can run in that situation makes a lot of sense. Vad Lee came in and he overtook the starting role pretty early in the game, and he looked pretty decent throughout the game. We saw him had 5 carries for 20 yards. He threw for 170 and 2 in the air, which was pretty solid. So I think from that perspective, those are something to look at. A lot of the sort of splits have worked themselves out and have sort of removed the split portion of things. There are still some small splits, and we do still think Luis Perez could play a bit. And then at the running back situation, we saw BJ Emmons not play last week. If BJ Emmons does not play this week, Juwan Washington is far and away the best running back, especially up against the Philly defense that really struggles to stop things on the ground. Jordan Ellis is not as much of a workhorse as he was earlier in the year. Flip side of that, CJ Maribel was able to light up Philly last weekend, was a workhorse. They sort of phased out Tony Brooks-James a bit, and it's made him look quite a bit better. And then the receivers, to look at, Bailey Gaither went nuts. We talked about last week, if he played, he would be a very, very good GPP play. He ended up breaking the slate, so that was a good thing to see. Despite getting like 12 targets a game over the last couple weeks. So those are some of the things to look at the recap from last week. But going into this week, we'll start here with the quarterbacks. So, Alex, we saw DeAndre Johnson play every snap last week, but we don't think that's going to maintain. Why don't you talk to everyone about that and explain what your thought process is there?
Yeah, the first thing in terms of changes with the active rosters this week, the teams moved from 38 to 40 active roster spots, and the practice squad from 7 to 10. So it could be a situation where you have in a couple of these running back and wide receiver rooms a bit more chance for rotation. Just wanted to point that out. But yeah, in terms of quarterback, I wouldn't be surprised at all if DeAndre Johnson maintains the full 100% role. We've talked the last few weeks that it's a possibility, and if the split was to go one way, it would be towards him. I just think we need to realize that there is a risk that Luis Perez could be used again in passing situations. So from a cash game perspective, he's going to look great and he has all this upside, but I think there's a bit more risk with him as compared to some of the other guys like Tamu, Cookus, Sloter, Vadley in terms of role. So it's a tough one. It's just a much more open slate than it has been, especially at the quarterback position. It's just tough to pay up here if their salary is any concern. So guys like Cookus or even Vadley at those price tags are pretty appealing, but you can't really go wrong with any of the top maybe 5 guys at quarterback. So it's definitely much more open. Do you have any initial thoughts on this slate?
So, I mean, I still think for me, Case Cookus still makes the most sense from cash games. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I have him tagged as core right now. If we could lock in 100% snaps for DeAndre, he would be my play, but there's just a little bit too much risk. And I think Cookus will bounce back a bit here.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with that. I mean, so for me, we've talked about it every week. It's not going to change. Cookus is the one quarterback you're going to get usage out of. He's going to throw the ball, which is very appealing to me. The one quarterback that stands out to me that I think is a great GPP play, and I'll be marking him as such later, is Shea Patterson. Patterson has 120 yards rushing over the last 2 games. So he's been rushing the ball quite a bit. He has not been splitting snaps. He did throw the ball 37 times last week, which I think is obviously a bit of an outlier. But I think he's a pretty good GPP play because it seems like his rushing volume has stepped up. So the last 2 weeks, he's averaged 20 points a game as a quarterback, which is pretty strong, especially in comparison to maybe some of the bottom end guys. Like Alex said, if you think DeAndre Johnson's going to get 100% of the snaps, he's clear QB1. It's not close. But with the possibility of Perez taking more snaps, it probably makes me lean towards Cookus. But what's your thoughts on Patterson?
Yeah, Patterson, every time I watch him, he just seems so frantic. But to your point, if he's just running around, trying to make plays downfield, run the ball, he's a guy that could be have actually a pretty bad real life football game, but still show well in the box score for fantasy purposes. And it's a game where they are probably going to be playing from behind. So probably skews a bit more pass heavy for them. And he's been making some plays at the very least. So it's definitely interesting. In terms of how you play him, how you pair him, you could probably just get away with a single stack and rely on some of his rush upside to carry him. But yeah, definitely there for tournaments makes sense to me.
For sure. All right, moving over to the running backs. It is currently the Juwan Washington show. He has the best matchup. He played 100% of snaps last week. They did not even activate another running back. So why don't you talk a little bit about Juwan Washington and his situation, what to expect there?
Yeah, I was trying to. There's been some roster moves that happened yesterday in terms of teams signing players because they have more roster spots. I was curious if Tampa would bring in another running back just because they were pretty short on them. And actually, Keith Mumphrey lined up in the backfield a bit. He was wearing number 25, so I guess that's not a huge surprise, but he only got one carry. So I would imagine if Emmons was out again, it'd be the Juwan Washington show all over against probably the best matchup in terms of opponent rush defense. But we just don't know at this point with BJ Emmons. There's been no injury reports released thus far. Hopefully we get those tomorrow and we'll update accordingly. Was something interesting. BJ Emmons tweeted yesterday that he was asking someone to set him up with a travel agent. So I don't know if he's trying to get back to Birmingham or leave Birmingham or what, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's a very interesting situation. Looking through some of the other running backs, we saw Anthony Jones come in. He was somewhat productive and did eat into Jordan Ellis's role quite a bit. But person we see here that maybe might be a little bit interesting to people up near the top of the projections is Darius Victor. Why don't you talk a little bit about Darius Victor and his situation?
Man, dude is all thighs, and props to Chris Jamino for being on the Darius Victor train from day one. He's just gotten more involved. His snap shares increased steadily over the course of the season. He's getting involved in the pass game. Like he's the clear goal line back. New Jersey running back is just going to be probably a pretty productive spot in general. And between him and Trey Williams, it's kind of a coin flip. But with when you're looking at his price tag, about $3,000 cheaper, he's clearly the better play. And I think he has that 2 touchdown upside. Like, I don't know if he's really going to break the slate ever. Like, he doesn't really have breakaway speed, but he's tough to tackle and will churn out yardage. So he's definitely a solid play there. And the Jordan Ellis thing, like, I think this could be a bounce back spot where he gets back to that like 20 carry type role. And that's just probably because New Orleans has a better chance to be playing from ahead here. In that situation, Jones probably eats as well. I think Jones is a much better running back than like Larry Rose, who's been terrible in XFL and this year. So them having probably more faith in a backup running back might even out that split a bit, but I still think it's a good spot for Jordan Ellis.
Yeah, so for the running backs for me this week, it's a bit more, like you said, it's a lot more clustered. Outside of Juwan Washington, I don't see clear-cut people that stand out totally. I do think Marable stands out a bit, especially with what he's done recently. I think Mark Thompson stands out a little bit, but like you go down to the Paul Terry, Matt Colburn situation. You talked about like they're rotating heavily. You probably want to play Terry because he's going to get more activity in the pass game, but overall, it's just not a great situation. But overall, the running backs to me look a lot less impressive than they did as a whole earlier in the year. So earlier in the season, like weeks 2, 3, 4, it was pretty evident to us that you realistically want to play 3 running backs. Now I think it's probably shedding a little bit more toward you want to play the extra receiver, maybe even play 3 or 4 receivers because we're seeing receivers really establish themselves where we're not seeing that with running back. What's your thoughts on that from a lineup construction standpoint?
Yeah, it seems to be all over the place. There hasn't been like a hard and fast rule this season in terms of that, but we are getting a little bit more comfortable on the wide receiver side in terms of guys who are getting those around 10 plus targets a game and have shown some upside. So like when you compare the upside of someone like a Jonathan Adams versus like a Garrett Groshek here at running back, like I think you're going to be leaning like the Adams type of player more times than not at the same price point. So it makes it tough. And then also you just don't know in some of these splits which way they go. Whereas the wide receiver is going to be running routes and getting targets. Like they're not necessarily, So someone like Trey Williams who's projecting well, it's tough for me to click them. So it might be a situation where some of these higher upside running backs do come in a bit owned because people feel better with the wide receiver side of thing. Cash, it's going to be a tough conversation. I'll probably still have 2 running backs at least, I think. But certainly it's a situation where in tournaments you skew more towards the high upside wide receivers. Those are the guys who are really going to go nuclear and break the slate like we saw with Gaither last week. Like I don't see many running backs having opportunities to get 30 plus fantasy point games.
No, and I mean, I agree. I think it's just interesting, especially from a perspective of like what to do in terms of roster construction. Early before the first week, we had an error, and we sort of thought it was going to be more like the XFL, where you wanted the receivers more so. Then it shifted to where the running backs were the clear, better options, and they made way more sense. But more recently, it sort of looks like a lot of the receivers make more sense to me. I mean, Juwan Washington obviously makes the most sense to me. He's someone that could have a really great game and has a clear path to success this week. Whereas like a lot of the other running backs, even Maribel and Victor, they have questions to me. And we've seen some of these receivers just get absolutely force-fed the ball. So that's interesting to me, the sort of shift we've seen as the season's gone on between what to do.
I think a lot of that's due towards the teams just getting more reps in and getting more comfortable. Like it's easier to come out and just run the ball because you don't have the timing aspect of the passing game necessarily. So I think teams are kind of figuring out the past games as the season's gone on. That's been evident, like just looking at league baselines with like yards per pass and yards per completion, like they've been steadily going up. So offenses are getting better just because I think they've had more time together.
Definitely. Going into the receivers, again, you sort of talked about it if salary mattered. It really doesn't. Salary does not really matter this week when you have Trey Walker and you have Juwan Washington. There's just a lot of value that's out there. Just by value, I mean the best plays. Like the best plays are literally priced $4K too cheap. So you can make realistically anything happen that you want. Some guys that we look at here, Isaiah Zuber, he caught a touchdown last week, a 44-yarder. That was a good sign for me. I talked to him up as a good GPP option last week. You talked up Bailey Gaither, and that if he was healthy, he would be a slam dunk GPP play. And he went out there and went absolutely nuclear. So to me, the clear two best like cash game plays are Trey Walker and Victor Bolden. Does anyone else stand out to you from a cash game perspective, and what's your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, those are definitely solid. We saw a situation where Bolden only got 8 targets. They spread the ball around a bit more, but he's still pretty reliable, like the 8 to 12 target range. He's going to get some chances in the red zone as well. So if salary doesn't matter, he's definitely one of the safest plays on the slate. But I would say if for some reason like Trey Walker and Juwan Washington were out or something and salary becomes something important, I would probably be looking to cut and drop down from Bolden. Bolden's more just like a luxury of the inefficiency in pricing. Like you probably wouldn't pay 10-6 for him if everyone was priced appropriately. Someone that's been interesting in terms of their role growing over the season is Kavontae Turpin for New Jersey. He just seems to be one of the focus points of their offense, and he's getting a couple carries too each game, even down in the red zone. So he's definitely someone interesting that's kind of gone up the projection board a bit over the course of the season. And yeah, the other guy you mentioned, Johnny Dixon, he's been really, really solid. He's the more reliable guy as compared to Jonathan Adams, who's more of a more downfield boomer bust type guy. So like Bolden and Dixon, both slot guys, high floor. You're paying for it, but there's safety there. I think Bailey Gaither's cash viable as well.
For sure. It's just difficult, I would say. So do you think you can play Gaither and Walker both in your cash game lineup?
I probably wouldn't. I'm also probably not playing cash games this week. So I'll be doing a lot of like double stacks with Walker, Gaither, and Vadley, and just filling in the other spots wherever. I think that's a pretty simple stack, and then you have a lot of options on the New Orleans side to bring back.
For sure. Looking a little bit lower down the list, a couple people that stand out to me, Bug Howard and Jordan Sewell, especially Sewell. He's been getting the volume. The volume's been there for Sewell. The routes that he's running would be productive to someone that could break a slate. So I really like Jordan Sewell. I don't think he'll be that highly owned. And then another person that I think makes a lot of sense is Sal Cannella. Cannella's been playing almost every snap for New Orleans, and he's been getting quite a few targets with those snaps as well. Grant, you are looking at a tight end, but to me, he looks really solid as that option. What's your thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of the Philly wide receivers, like I'm going to keep paying into that Ponzi scheme of double stacking Philadelphia. At one point, it'll work out. But I just think that's a situation where if you're playing Cookus in tournaments, I think most of the time, more times than not, you should be double stacking because he's gonna throw the ball so often, rack up those PPR points. Like you don't even necessarily have to get all the touchdowns in terms of the receiving. Like if someone like Bug Howard goes six for 90, like that's probably good enough. Yeah, so in terms of New Orleans, yeah, Canelo is a good call. Like he was leading their league in wide yards, receiving yards as of like last week. So yeah, definitely a good option. I will say I'm probably a tad bit lower on New Orleans passing game this year, this week as compared to the last couple weeks. I think New Orleans can play from ahead, and they'll be more run heavy this week with Ellis. But certainly, if there's a neutral or situation they're coming from behind, they're going to throw the ball a lot, and we've seen that. We've seen them get off a lot of plays as well. The other guy that kind of sticks out to me is where he had like his role has been all over the place is John Franklin for Tampa Bay. Like he actually led that team in snaps last week, led them in targets. It's been interesting. Like he didn't get any Wildcat snaps before, but it's clear that they're using him all over the field, and they have a game plan for him each game, it seems. So someone like him at 4K might get overlooked just that you don't need that salary. So playing him as an easy pivot off of a Trey Walker is something that's definitely interesting. He showed some upside last week.
For sure. All right. Moving on to the defense, my opinion is going to stay the same. Spread it out in GPPs. I think that you do not want to realistically get tied. For me, the Bandits make the most sense in cash games because Philly throws the ball, which therefore will lead to more interactions defensively. What's your thoughts on defense? Has anything changed for you on your thoughts there?
No, I mean, there's going to be three. I think there's three clear defenses that people will play most often is the Bandits, as you mentioned, against Philadelphia, the Stallions against Michigan. I like that one a bit just because I think Shea Patterson is a walking turnover, and I think we see a lot of dropbacks from him. So I like Birmingham. And then obviously the Breakers against Pittsburgh. I'm less inclined to play into that one in terms of ownership because I think that could just be kind of a run heavy game on both sides. But yeah, beyond that, definitely spread it out on the others.
For sure. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. I don't think anything will change there from defense. All right, Alex, is there anything else that you think we forgot to cover during this show?
No, I'll say my favorite stack is playing the Mahler stack with Vadley, the two receivers, and then pick your favorite bring back on New Orleans. I think that's kind of a fun one. But no, it's a really wide open week. Things might change a bit once we start getting injury reports, hopefully tomorrow. Slate doesn't start till Saturday, so we kind of have an extra day of preparation as compared to a couple of weeks in the past. So we'll be getting up the full tags and ownership and updated projections tomorrow. But yeah, I think we hit most of the high points.
Yep. And for those wondering, we are recording this Thursday afternoon. We delayed a day trying to get some more info, which obviously did not occur. So make sure you check into the Discord. I know Alex posts any actives and inactives in there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask him there. All right, everyone, that's going to wrap it up for us this week. For Alex, I am Sean. Good luck to everyone. We will see you next week.